Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. We've got 2 out of 3 geeks, and it turns out you can probably just put in a replacement player at level 3 because I think Patrick is just that good, just like his contemporary up north, which will be a subject we'll be talking about tonight. So, again, this is the Boxscore Geeks show. I am Dre Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. We have Patrick Minton, aka at NBA Geek, and then, of course, the voice of God, our producer. Brian Foster. And so if you're not muted, Brian, go ahead and say hey so the audience doesn't get freaked out by your voice.
Oh, well, if you didn't say anything at all, they wouldn't get freaked out, Dre. But now that he said something, I don't know, it could happen.
All right, so Patrick, we've had a bit of a discussion on our personal forums, and then that ended up in a few articles, both at Wages of Wins and Box Score Geeks, on replacement player. And as it is, whenever these come up, people from the baseball community find it their opportunity to hop in and talk. And you created it, I wouldn't actually say you created, but when you talked about the myth of replacement players about a week ago, it created a bit of controversy, I guess. And yeah, we were just going to talk about replacement players to that level. And I'll let you go. I've got some thoughts that weren't in either of the articles, but obviously as you started it and then got a great article out of Dave, from the discussions back and forth. Would love to hear kind of your thoughts on this kerfuffle.
Well, I think all it really boils down to is there's a difference between marginal production of a worker or a player in this case, and when we're talking in basketball, you're talking about the production of wins because that's really what a player does: is he wins basketball games or not, versus how much you pay that player, which are two different sort of discussions, right? And I think there's a couple of myths in here. The first myth, which is it started off with the article that Nate Silver wrote about Carmelo Anthony. This myth being that a player who produces an average number of wins should somehow be worth zero, because that doesn't make any sense. Obviously, even a player who produces that average production in the NBA is worth a lot of money because, by definition, because the NBA itself generates lots of revenue. So anybody who's capable of playing at an average level in the NBA is worth, a certain amount of money, right? Will produce a certain number of wins. So I just I took exception to this idea that that you start with replacement level and you call that your baseline and you say that's zero, because that's not really how. And not only is that not how labor economics works, but that's certainly not how you would measure productivity in the NBA.
Well, and everybody kind of was getting annoyed at that because, the analogy which Dave used in the article you wrote up, and then again in the article he wrote up, was the car dealership, which is to say, if they came up to you at a car dealership and said the average car dealer guy sells 2 cars a month, you sell 5 cars a month. So we're going to pay you for 3 cars. We're not going to pay you for those initial 2. Well, those cars were worth money, and that it's not like you can get that worker for free.
Yeah.
And then if you go on the argument of replacement level, I what kind of bugs me about the myth of this is that it's kind of just shows the naivete people have when it comes to the CBAs and all these different sports. Because, for instance, even in the NBA, you have issues, which is when you sign a player, you're typically locked into that contract for a while if they're a player of any value. If they're a first round pick, if you're signing a veteran to, that's of any value, you're going to give them a multi-year deal. So you're locked in. So it's not as simple as saying, I've got Carmelo Anthony for 20 million a year. There are now a bunch of small forwards on the market that would only cost me $1 million. Carmelo Anthony, therefore, is only worth, 19 because I could just replace him with 1 million. That's not how it works. And then, as we kind of talked, the market shifts, right? So the idea of a replacement player. For the Spurs, the replacement player is kind of stupid, right? They just have someone on their bench they can give more minutes to. But to a normal team, if I wanted to get a replacement level player and I have to go onto the open market and find them, the market is not going to be the same every year. I might have a year where there are teams with a glut of point guards that are just willing to trade him for nothing. There might be a year where the only point guards that are available are veterans that are going to cost me $3-4 million. You can't really put a normal value on that. And, trying to make one formula that's putting those two things together, to me, is just, for all the guff wins produced gets about being, the one catch-all formula, this is that exact problem where you're now putting labor economics next to sports production and trying to put them into one formula and trying to do it simply, which just doesn't make any sense.
Well, to me, and even okay, so another problem I have with the sort of replacement level player myth, and I'm going to keep calling it that, is the idea that any replacement level player will produce at an average level. That is, I mean, that's really ridiculous because um, by definition, half the players in the NBA at any given time are going to play below average. So the idea that any random player off the street who wants to play in the NBA would step in and play at the average or even at the median level is kind of crazy. If that were the case, if there were that many players capable of playing at an average level, then there would be much, much more parity in the NBA than there is. Right now, you look at the NBA, there are 5 or 10 teams at the top, and there's a lot of teams at the bottom, and there's some in the middle. If things were if there were really that many average level players, then what you would see is 2 or 3 teams at the top because they're the ones that have like LeBron James or other decisive superstars, and then you'd see a ton of teams clumped up in the middle, all winning around 40 games. But you don't see that, and it's not all because of teams tanking. It's mostly because there just isn't that much talent to go around. The difference between the very good NBA players and the very bad NBA players is actually really big. And the difference even between the average players and the bad players is still really big. There just aren't enough people in the world capable of playing at that average level that you could just literally take a guy from the NCAA or the D League or the European League or whatever and swap him in, and suddenly you have an average level player. So,
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
that
if you want to call a replacement level somebody who performs at the league minimum amount, who produces very few wins because they're like, at the like sort of the, let's call it the, I think what Dave called it would be like, what's the minimum amount of wins you would want to produce in order to pay somebody the league minimum? If you could get those kinds of people from the Euro leagues, the D leagues, the CBA, etc., yeah, that might be a replacement level player. That's fine. But the Silver article was treating a replacement level player as an average player, which is crazy.
well, and also even to your point on the CBA or to not CBA to taking from like the Euro League. This again, people I feel really geeky that I've done this for fun. And I don't even profess to be an expert. Larry Kuhn, for instance, is an expert on the CBA, and there are people that know way more about Euro leagues. But I recall during the lockout, Mosey Platt wrote up on this, and basically FIFA, or FIBA, not FIFA, FIBA, which is the International Organization for Basketball, basically has the NBA and the other leagues honoring each other's contracts, which means like with Ricky Rubio, that was one of the issues, right? He's on a Spanish team. If the Timberwolves wanted him, they had to pay off that contract there. So basically,
Yeah.
there's an agreement between the international leagues and the NBA. We'll honor each other's contracts. So it's not like you can just come into the NBA and offer our guy 2 million and
Right.
take him without honoring his contract and vice versa. So even then, this idea that there's this glut of just players out there that are valuable or even just average, as you pointed out, average isn't easy, is just a myth because even if there are players like that in the Euro League or the Chinese League, to get them, Chinese League, sorry, to get them, you're going to have to pay off their contract. And so that's non-trivial. And then the other piece of research Dave has done, I think this is published, if not, or actually, I don't think he published. I think the sad truth of it is if you look at players that go from the D League to the NBA, they're just not good. I mean, this shouldn't be a surprise. If you're a professional basketball player in your mid 20s and you're in the D League and you're in there for an extended period of time and not in the NBA, you're probably not good enough to get in the NBA. And if you go into the NBA, you're probably not going to be very good. So basically, the caliber of players in the D League is not really good enough to replace NBA talent players. And then, of course, the NCAA, they have rules as well, right? If you're going to go from the NCAA to the NBA, you have to go through the draft, you have to declare, you're not allowed to be a student and that. So, like, it's not as if there's just these players waiting around to be plucked up for the league minimum. Almost every amount of basketball players out there that can come into the NBA have rules and restrictions the NBA has to follow. And the ones that are good in the NBA would want certainly aren't, $500,000 players.
I'll take a little bit of exception to you there because I think it's certainly possible to find players who for at or near the league minimum who are great deals and who are actually great players. I mean, either through the draft or from finding a couple of unsigned, undrafted players as gems. Uh, the one guy I'm going to bring up right now that I think we should all keep our eyes open for is Mike Muscala for the Hawks. He was a guy that our draft models loved, and I don't think anyone signed him. I think he might have been drafted in the second round 2 years ago,
Hmm.
but nobody ever signed him. And then this year, the Hawks picked him up as a free agent and gave him a 3-year contract at the league minimum. And I mean, so you can find gems in or diamonds in the rough or whatever metaphor you want to use. But I think the point of it is that um, this isn't like this isn't like baristas for coffee houses where the number of people who could do the job far outstrip the demand for coffee houses to hire them. In fact, it's quite the opposite. There are definitely more jobs in the NBA than there are like average or better NBA players in the world. So,
Absolutely.
and I think, and the reason you can find gems, diamonds in the rough, whatever, is because there are some teams and some GMs do a poor job of talent evaluation. They pay players too much money, or they pay players that they shouldn't pay at all. They hold on to draft picks too long after they bust, et cetera, et cetera. And all those people are occupying roster spots, and so that's why guys like Mike Muscala don't end up on teams earlier than they do.
Yeah, and that was, I think, one of the last points in Dave's article, which is to say, also, the idea of a replacement level player only really makes sense if you kind of have an efficient market where talent evaluation is good. And we don't see that in the NBA. And I think he left baseball alone for this case. But one of the things I know
Yeah,
for a
I
fact,
would have been really interested to see data on, what was it like in baseball in the 80s or something, right? Because I think one of the reasons it's like that in baseball is because of the Moneyball revolution. The talent evaluation is now in baseball is so much closer to the reality of how many wins a player produces than it used to be, right?
well,
So
they actually did do a study that basically on base percentage wasn't getting paid and then started getting paid for. And there are all sorts of other factors that I mean are still problems. I mean, I think they're still overrating in high school prospects and I think other stuff, but I haven't been in that for a while, so I don't know 100%. But I mean, I
But
think
the point stands that the market for baseball players is way more efficient than the market for NBA players because the talent evaluators are much more, I don't know if I want to say realistic is the word, but they're much more accurate at predicting future performance for players or evaluating current performance than NBA general managers are.
and the funny part about that though is in baseball it's much more inconsistent year to year. So they may be more efficient at knowing what to pay for, but there's less control over it. So in baseball, when they're paying for players that go, well, you look really good, it goes, we're not as sure next year you'll look good. Whereas there's a reason, Dan Gilbert made that letter about LeBron James. And I just laugh when people, like, I think you were talking about Chris Bosh in the pre-show. I just laugh when people think that Chris Bosh is going to go back to his old self. And you've been saying that for weeks now, that you find it hilarious. Anybody thinks he's going to go back to his 24-10 levels.
24-12 is what I
Was it
hear.
12? Was it 12?
24-12. Anyone who thinks that Bosch is going to average 24 and 12 just because LeBron is no longer there to eat up all the possessions is crazy.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Bosch is not 26 years old anymore, and there's no reason to think that he could go back to that level of performance that he had at that age. There's also no reason to think that he can just flip a switch and suddenly turn in, after 4 years of practicing a very specific style of basketball within a certain system, he can suddenly flip a switch and go back to playing a totally different style, the one he played 4 years ago. I just don't know why any rational human being would consider that the most likely outcome. It could happen, but I would never bet $24 million a year on it.
Well, yeah. I mean, in baseball, the most consistent stats are significantly less predictive than just your previous year's performance, even on another team in basketball. So, what Chris Bosh did this year, if you want to slap a bet and say he'll be close to that next year, you're probably not far off, better than a coin flip. And if you factor in
Yeah.
age factors and stuff, you'll probably be even closer.
I totally wouldn't bet against Bosch's numbers looking a little better next year, especially the points per game numbers. But I don't see a return to, the 25-year-old Bosch coming around. I mean, to me, the best Bosch ever was I believe it was 2008, was the year after his first Team USA appearance, where he played with guys like Kobe and he came out of that like with a real like you could tell the way he was playing. He was rebounding a lot more. He was playing really energetic defense, but he was doing lots of things that are easy to do when you're 25, 26 years old and you're just motivated to do them. But now he's 30 years old, and I don't think that he can just suddenly make his body do those 26-year-old things anymore. And I think it's crazy that anybody. I'm not saying 30 years old is ancient, but
It's way different.
it's way different. And I mean, I hate pulling the whole. If you've ever played basketball, you'd know this card, but it's really true. Like, if you played at a reasonably competitive level, and by competitive I mean like if you were in like leagues, even if it's rec leagues, if you were playing with guys where the referees keeping track of the score, like if you played at that kind of level and you played through your 20s at that level, you would know that you at 30 you're just not the same player you are at 26. With some possible exceptions for people that are, you know, crazy fitness freaks.
Well, I
It's
mean,
just
even that,
not.
that's the point is like we see players in the NBA atrophy all the time. And that's why players like, Kobe and Nash stick around and hopefully LeBron is they basically go, this is my job. I'm going to have to commit myself to a certain diet, to a certain lifestyle. I'm going to have to make sure I get operations done that are required to keep my body in, peak physical form. They basically go, the amount of upkeep I have to put into myself to keep playing at this level, I'm going to commit to that. And not everybody's willing to do that.
And yeah, and when I see how LeBron has changed his game, even now, he's like 29, but his game is still a little bit different than it was 3, 4 years ago, and it's more refined. There are lots of things that he's much better at than he used to be, like his long range shooting, and I just don't see that Chris Bosh has done that sort of level of effort. I'm not saying that Chris Bosh hasn't changed his game, but I don't think that Bosh has changed his game in a way that's going to help him, become suddenly a superstar now that LeBron's not in the mix.
Sorry about the camera
Just
shaking. That's my dog going underneath my table. But yeah, so I mean, I guess if we've got any last, and this show might only be 30 minutes this week to make up for I think the hour and 15 it was last week, which is fine. But I'm curious on any last thoughts on wins above replacement. We've got what 3 big posts on it now,
well,
basically.
I think that I don't know if I like the idea of wins above replacement, but I do like the idea of trying to calculate sort of what is the wins per dollar number that you're looking for when you're paying players. So when I look at the spreadsheets we published on our site, like, that Arturo has worked through, like you can look at things like Mana Ellis produces, let's say, 4 wins, and therefore Mana Ellis is worth 7, 8 million dollars a year and is in a fair contract. But I look at that and I don't think he is worth that money because of opportunity costs. He plays like 3,000 minutes to produce those 4 or 5 wins
And takes how many shots?
and takes well, yeah. I don't even want to get into shots, but if you just think of, well, if I had a better player playing those minutes, I would win more games.
Well, I
Which is what wins above replacement is trying to get at. But where I'm really going is to say that the amount of money I pay you should really be based on how many wins you produce per minute, not how many wins you produce, period. And then based on that, I can. So I guess to put it another way, an average player who is like one of my backups might be worth a little bit more money than an average player who is my starter, not more money. But I would evaluate that contract differently, right? So when I'm paying my 7th man or my 8th man, I think I'm perfectly okay having a fair contract where he makes about as much money as the wins he produces. Whereas when I'm paying my starter, I would much rather have an unfair contract where he produces much more wins than I'm paying him for.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I actually do want to stick on that point where you said you didn't even want to argue it, but like for replacement cost and opportunity costs, I absolutely think shots come in because, one of the hills I keep dying on is Russell Westbrook. And one of the things that drives me nuts about Russell Westbrook is you look at him and he's like sixth or seventh in shooting efficiency on that team. And he
Worse than
takes
shots.
and he's first, well, I think he was second this year, but there was a year he was shooting more shots per game than Kevin Love, and Durant, both Kevin Love and Durant.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think that would have been the case this year too, had he not been injured.
yeah. So, but I mean, the other thing that bugs me is, he was gone for a month, and that was Kevin Durant's most efficient month. And, the answer there being the shots that were lost by Westbrook not shooting were clearly not shots that the team would have just fallen down on. They still could have kept, I think it was an outlier. I think Kevin Durant did definitely pour it on. I wouldn't necessarily expect him to keep it up. But all I'm saying is, even for proponents of the usage curve, the idea that five players on your team that are shooting above 55% true shooting are going to fall below 52% true shooting if you give them one or two more shots each is ridiculous. And so that's an opportunity cost, like you said, minutes. And then of course money. We've got the salary cap. So when we're talking about replacement level players and all that, all of these things come into play, and I don't think enough people think about that.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
That's all I got there. And
That's
yeah,
all I really got
all
to.
I'll say is based on some of the comments that include some of the baseball players. I'm looking at you, Tango Tiger, if you're listening. Just still show a lack of understanding, and
Well,
that's
yeah,
not
and
that's not
that's
a mean thing. I'll try and be nice before I let you chime in, which is to say, this is not easy stuff. This is not complicated stuff. I actually usually go back and forth with Dave several times and other people because I'm not, I didn't go to school for economics, so this isn't easy. What I get annoyed at is this isn't easy stuff, so it gets obnoxious when people treat it like it's easy and then treat you like you're dumb for not agreeing with their incorrect
well,
valuations.
in general, people who sorry, I'm going to try and phrase this maybe I'm not going to try to phrase this diplomatically. Basically, if you come at me and tell me something that is factually wrong while calling me dumb for my point of view, then I mean my sort of tolerance level to have an actual rational discussion with you is going to be pretty low. And I've been noticing this a lot last week when I've been in all, this is a nice segue, in most of my conversations around Kevin Love. I feel like I've had lots of conversations with people who just say like things that are objectively ridiculous and have no basis in fact, while they call me dumb. And that's usually, to me, that's usually like how I know I'm on the right track and I should just double down on my position.
So in terms of Kevin Love, what is an example, top
So
example from this week?
I am seeing a ton of resurgence of arguments that all ring bells with me because I saw them all in like 2009 when so around 2000, I'm forgetting now if it was 2008 or 2009, but believe during Kevin Love's rookie year, which was 2008, I made tons of arguments that the Timberwolves killed the OJ Mayo trade, and lots of people came back with OJ Mayo's high scoring, and I came back with per minute numbers on Kevin Love's rebounding, and at the time he was very much an average scorer for a rookie, or for as a rookie he was very much an average scorer, but a totally elite rebounder, like a Dennis Rodman level rebounder. And my argument to everybody was like, look, I understand he's not great at scoring, but he's average at scoring, and he happens to be like one of the best rebounders the NBA has ever seen. How could you possibly argue that such a man is not like worthy of being the number one pick? And the fact that we got him plus Mike Miller just to give them the totally overrated scorer in OJ Mayo, we're killing it. And then I heard lots of arguments around. My favorite ones included that he padded his rebound stats. First of all, let me just back up a second. So you talk about people like on Grantland, like Bill Simmons and those guys, and they talk about Kevin Love padding his stats, which is probably the stupidest thing I've ever heard anyone who is paid to analyze basketball ever say. Because
Thank you, by the way. Thank you.
The idea that Kevin Love pads his stats, this implication that he walks out on the court and he grabs rebounds and scores points, and the other 9 players just kind of let him because they're like, oh, let's look at Kevin Love doing his thing again, padding his stats. Isn't that good? We'll let him do that. Like, nothing like that ever happens. I mean, that's the NBA doesn't work that way. The NBA doesn't work that way with your opponents. Like, even when you're playing against Philadelphia, they don't just let you do things. The NBA certainly doesn't work that with teammates. The thing that drove me fucking bonkers last year was Lance Stevenson steals rebounds from Roy Hibbert. Now, okay, I'll buy the argument that Roy Hibbert is a terrible defensive rebounder, so there's more defensive rebounds up for grabs whenever Roy Hibbert's on the floor. That's fine, but the idea that Paul George and George Hill and David West just kind of all move out of the way and say, here, Lance, have one of Roy Hibbert's missed defensive rebounds. I won't fight you for it. That doesn't happen in the NBA. That's ridiculous.
Well, what kind of drives me crazy on that argument, and I keep saying this, and I'll probably be saying it in 10 years still, is this notion that a player can create shots and steal rebounds. These are two of the most popular memes in sports commentary in the NBA. The one way to pad your stats, by the way, is to just shoot. If you're Russell Westbrook, by the way, on your Kevin Love point, his rookie year, his true shooting percentage was as good as or better than every year but one of Russell Westbrook's year. So if you're calling Kevin Love an average scorer his rookie year, which I agree with you, by the way, on, then basically by the people that tell me how great Russell Westbrook is, Kevin Love's been an elite scorer his entire career.
Well, but he has.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
But all I'm saying is,
so yeah,
if you get a rebound, how are you stealing a rebound from your teammates? That is good for your team. Like, it seems so weird to me that people get upset. They're like, oh, he just stole a rebound. It's like, he got the ball first. Is that a bad? Should he not go for the ball?
I think there's absolutely an element of diminishing returns in defensive rebounds. We know this. It's baked into our formula, right? It's baked into our formula in 2 places. One, because defensive rebounds aren't worth as much as offensive rebounds because they're easier to get because they're part of team defense. And 2, because there's an actual adjustment for the fact that every time you get a defensive rebound, you are essentially taking one away from a teammate. Or you're not taking one away. You're taking. Look at it this way: whenever you get a defensive rebound, you're taking the potential that one of your teammates might have gotten that rebound away. So there's certainly diminishing returns in defensive rebounding. By the way, there's no evidence. I just want to point this out to any listeners. There's no evidence of any diminishing returns in offensive rebounding. So you put Reggie Evans and Kevin Love together, they're probably both going to be amazing on the offensive board. And in fact, the Timberwolves are living proof of that because Pekovic and Love are both amazing offensive rebounders, and neither of the numbers seem to be affected by whether or not the other guy is on the floor or not. So there's absolutely diminishing returns around defensive rebounding. And then there's certainly also the fact that you look at, for example, free throws, defensive rebounds on free throws. Obviously, Kevin Love is going to get more than, say, J.J. Barea or Ricky Rubio because those players aren't even lining up at the stripe to get those defensive rebounds, right? So yeah, there's some gimmies in defensive rebounding, but Kevin Love is probably the second or third best offensive rebounder in the NBA. So this isn't really a factor because this is what he's amazing at. And B, the implication that, that Kevin Love takes the rebounds, but then players like Pekovic or Dante Cunningham or whoever else happens to be playing, just kind of let him because they don't care about their stats. It's just insanely stupid. I mean, the argument makes no logical sense. There's no evidence that anything like that happens.
Yeah, and I mean, the other popular argument that I hate is, he's a looter and a riot. I hate this term too, because to score a lot of points in the NBA and get a lot of rebounds, you can't just play in garbage time, which is the basic argument is if you're on a bad team, towards the end of the game, when the game isn't close, it's garbage time. So players that stay out there can pad their stats. Love the idea of padding stats. Kevin Love plays, 30 some odd minutes every game. So it's not as if he's just, sitting out there, gets 0 points, 0 rebounds for the first 36 minutes of the game. And then in the last 3 minutes, he picks up 20 points and 10 rebounds and goes, yep, got mine. When I actually have to play for real, when I'm next to, a better player like LeBron, I'm just going to be terrible during those minutes, which just doesn't make any sense. And then just also this notion that somehow on a better offense, he would be worse at offense. And by the way, he is fifth in the league in true shooting percentage for players that take at least 15 shots a game. One player that beat him out this year, which was remarkable, is Dirk Nowitzki. By the way, I just got to give a shout out to that. Dirk Nowitzki is the only player 34 years or older to shoot as well as he has since Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And in fact, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the only other player to do it. So Dirk, yeah, I guess he just doesn't age. I don't know what's up with that.
Yeah, I mean, the things we have to remember about Kevin Love is that a lot of his offense comes from offensive rebounding. So there's a difference between a great offensive rebounder like Reggie Evans, who wins possessions for other players, and a great offensive rebounder like Kevin Love, who really wins possessions for himself. Because when Kevin Love gets an offensive rebound, the most common result is that he puts the ball back in the basket himself, or he gets to the free throw line or something like that. When Dennis Rodman or Reggie Evans got offensive rebounds, they would dribble it out and give it to another player. But that's not how Kevin Love's offense worked, right? He puts it back in himself. So he's going to keep getting those opportunities regardless of what team he's on. And then another thing that people seem to totally be forgetting, or maybe they're not aware of it, maybe they don't ever watch Timberwolves games, that Kevin Love is actually a very, very good post-up player. He's totally improved a lot in that aspect of his game. His best move is by far when he's turning on the left shoulder and doing a little kind of combination baby hook sort of push-up shot put style shot. And it's very hard to guard. It's very efficient, and he's extremely good in the low block. And then, of course, everyone knows that he's a great three-point shooter. But not only is he really good as a three-point shooter, he's also very good at, using ball fakes to get players in the air and get by them and get to the line. And I don't understand why anybody thinks those skills would really change on a different team. And then finally, the whole, great player on a bad team thing doesn't really apply because, that's the Timberwolves won 40 games in the Western Conference last year, which wasn't actually, trivial. And if you look at their point differential, they were about a 47-win team, or they should have been expected to be about a 47-win team. So Kevin Love put up MVP numbers on a 47-win team. I don't understand why people
in the West, which in
the West,
East,
yeah.
And that would be like a 52, 53-win team in the East,
Yeah,
probably.
I don't understand why people are even dragging out that. But the last argument I want to talk about that I've been seeing a lot of is the idea that Kevin Love gets lots of defensive rebounds because he cheats off his man to let his man shoot and then grabs that rebound. Which, if you think about it,
that one drives me crazy.
That drives me nuts because the idea is, usually what happens in the NBA when you just let your man shoot and you don't try to contest the shot is that they make the shot. In which case, it's really hard to grab a defensive rebound. And so some people argue, well, he doesn't really just let them, get layups. He just doesn't. He contests just enough to their field goal percentage is a little bit better, but then gets himself in a good position for the rebound. So I don't even know. I honestly don't know if anyone making this argument has ever watched basketball or ever plays basketball because it's totally asinine. Most of the time. So let's put it this way: Kevin Love is not a good shot blocker, and this is not anything controversial to say this. He's just not a very good shot blocker, right? So, but when I'm thinking back to when I was coached, and when you were being coached on defense, what's the things that your coach always told you to do? Don't leave your feet. Don't try to block the shot. Just try to contest the shot. Try to get a hand in their face,
stay in front of the guy,
and then stay in front of the guy. And then after your guy shoots, box him out. So it seems to me like, if I'm not a good shot blocker, it seems to me that staying on my feet and then boxing him out to get in a good position to get the defensive rebound is exactly what he should be doing as a defender. It's just there's absolutely anyone who says that he is somehow padding his stats by doing that simply doesn't understand team basketball.
I will give the argument of padding your blocks doing that, where you basically cheat off your guy to double team another person and try and get the block. Well, the one reason I don't worry too much about that, though, is if you look at the most elite, I'll put that in quotes, I should do it for real for the people watching, elite shot blockers, is that they get maybe 3 or 4 blocks a game. It's not very many. So I'm not too worried that they're cheating that much, right? That's a couple plays a game, maybe. So I'm still not that worried.
And I think also when people talk about this, like getting in position to get a rebound, that they talk about Kevin Love's help defense, that he doesn't come over to help, but instead tries to get position to get the defensive rebound. And here again, I gotta say, particularly as a help defender, you're implying that the guy's already gotten past his man, he's going to the basket. If Kevin Love were not helping there, that person's going to score layups. That person is not going to present rebounding opportunities. Now, if you want to just argue Kevin Love's not a very good help defender because he doesn't protect the rim, that's perfectly fine. And I'll agree with you. He's not a rim protector, but that's not what he's paid for. That doesn't mean he's somehow doing things that hurt the team in order to pad his stats. And oh my God, why didn't I pad my stats when I was in college? I should have padded my stats when I was in college. Maybe I'd have gotten the team. I probably could have made the team.
I was going to say made the NBA. I thought you were going to say made
No,
the
I didn't even
NBA.
make my college team, but I bet if I'd padded my stats in practice, I'd have made the team.
By the way, one kind of last note on the pad the stats. I know we've got down a few things, and we'll see what other topics we come up with in the off season as this when Kevin Love finally settles. I guess Denver's still in the running, and they're offering up for Reed, so Minnesota could still be in all right shape.
You know what? I don't know if I believe any other rumors going on, but I've seen a couple of. To be honest, the Cleveland trade, sorry, the trade I'd like worst as a Minnesota fan would definitely be the Golden State trade because you don't get any assets, right? Like, I mean, David Lee is not worth anything. Klay Thompson is not worth anything. Harrison Barnes is not worth anything. There's no draft picks. It's an awful deal. But I don't like the Cleveland trade any better than that. I mean, the Chicago trade and the rumors of a Denver trade both look much better to me as well. But people seem to think I'm biased in this discussion because I'm a Timberwolves fan, and I'll say this much: I'm first and foremost going to be a fan next year of whatever team Kevin Love goes to. So believe me when I say I'm not really biased. Like if I'm telling you Cleveland, you should give up Andrew Wiggins, it's not because I'm trying to make life miserable for Cleveland, because I'm going to be watching a lot of Cleveland games if it happens. It's just, but I mean, if you look at the rumors that you've heard, the one that has to look most appealing would have to be the Denver trade. But that's why the Denver trade does not include any players that Flip Saunders traditionally likes. If you look at the players that Flip Saunders traditionally likes,
get like 15 minutes a game. Jeez.
Yeah, if you look at the players that Flip Saunders traditionally likes, they very much fit the mold of the guys he's been drafting, and have been Kevin Martin and Zach Levine and point guards and shooting guards, and he's actually probably the last guy in the NBA that still likes the mid-range game. It just doesn't seem to have a lot of Flip Saunders players in the deal.
Yeah. Just need, a team of 5-point guards that all shoot badly, and you're set.
Yeah. I think Minnesota right now, as they're constructed, has the problem that Pekovic and Love don't have great synergy on defense, especially because they just don't have any rim protection. Love fits much better next to Gorgie Deng. And if they trade Love for Fareed, they still have that same problem.
Yeah.
I think that what Minnesota really needs to do is to trade Pekovic for good wing players and just give the minutes to Deng. It might all work out anyway with Pekovic's injury history, but we'll see. Another thing people tend to forget is that Minnesota last year had a perfectly average defense.
Yep, it was above average, actually. They were 12th in the league.
Were they 12th? I thought they were 14th.
I thought they were 12th, but I could be wrong.
I was looking at efficiency on ESPN, and I thought they were exactly in the middle.
Their defensive rating was 12th last season.
So I was just looking at Hollinger's defensive efficiency, and it was 104 points per 100, which was right smack in the middle of the NBA.
They gave up 206 points per 100 possessions, according to.
So having watched lots of Timberwolves games, and okay, let's base on either watching the games or what you believe or what reputations are. We all know Kevin Martin's an awful defender. Love is supposedly an awful defender. Pekovic can't protect the rim. How did they get the average efficiency rating if Love is so bad at defense. It
And
doesn't make
in terms of myths, because that's one of the defenses that Clay Thompson is getting. And I saw this BS article. I'm gonna have to link now because I brought it up. That said, Golden State not as interested in Love. They still care about team defense. And that's one of their arguments for Clay Thompson is that he's a good defender. According to Synergy Sports, which is a stat that looks at play-by-play, and there are issues with it. People don't agree with it. The reason I'll actually bring it up is it's one of the few defensive stats out there that I can see why it's telling me a player is good or bad at defense.
it.
One of the guys, I think a few people brought up defensive Rap'em, which I give 0 points to because you can't tell me why it says someone is good or bad at defense. And if you can't tell me why they're good or bad at defense, it does me no good if you tell me they're above or below average. But looking at Synergy Sports, Kevin Love was marginally only 0.02 points worse per possession on defense than Klay Thompson. I guess Rapham, the new stat that ESPN is going with, also likes Love more on defense than Klay Thompson. So what's interesting to me is this is just a case where people are following a narrative. Everybody knows Kevin Love is bad on defense. Everybody knows Kevin Love can't win because he's on Minnesota. So that's what everybody's saying when they're saying why not to trade for Kevin Love, and nobody's just doing the simple thing of just looking at the numbers. And Arturo's been giddy over this. He's been including DeMarcus Cousins, but the number of people who get 24 points and 12 rebounds a game before they're 25, it's a small list. And unlike DeMarcus Cousins, Kevin Love is, one of the most efficient shooters in the league. So if you just look down for a second and go, Moses Malone, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I think Charles Barkley, players like that, it's like the players that can do this have traditionally led their teams to finals. You just have to give them a team and not have insane, the sad truth for Minnesota is you're just in a terrible conference with bad injury or a good conference with bad injuries.
Well, yeah, I mean, terrible in the sense that it's terrible to play there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not in a great division either. I mean,
yeah, I think almost as ridiculous as all the sort of regurgitated myths from 2009 about Kevin Love's game that I've had to put up with have been the people who seem to think that once he gets to Cleveland, the same thing will happen to him that happened to Chris Bosh. And he'll suddenly just turn into an 18-10 guy, and it's ludicrous. And so I was actually saying this 4 years ago, like not just now, but like 4 years ago, Kevin Love was a better offensive player than Chris Bosh. There's no question in my mind about it. That has only magnified since then. The idea that Kevin Love will somehow not get scoring opportunities if he's playing in Cleveland because LeBron and Kyrie Irving will take all the shots. It's absolutely absurd. LeBron is not stupid, and LeBron knows from having played with Kevin Love on Team USA and having watched tape, etc. LeBron knows full well that Kevin Love is a much better offensive player than Chris Bosh was and is. LeBron is not going to just sit by and take all the shots, nor is he going to sit by and let Kyrie Irving take all the shots. LeBron is going to make sure that Kevin Love gets involved in that offense and gets plenty of shots.
Oh, I can't wait. And by the way, I'm in Wisconsin now, but I will buy a ticket to Milwaukee Bucks versus Cleveland if LeBron James and Kevin Love are on the team together. I have to see that because I've seen not Kevin Love. Actually, I've seen both. The two of the games I went to watch the Nuggets, I paid for really good seats, were Kevin Love and LeBron James. And what's kind of sad to me, to be honest, is LeBron James was transcendent. I watched the game. I remember a bunch. I know my memory's not good, but that's beside the point. But, his game is you watch him. And Kevin Love was absurd on rebounding. And I could not remember it for the life of me. When I looked at the box score after the game, Kevin Love, I was like, really? You got 15 rebounds or whatever he got that night? So really, I mean, I've watched both of them up close. I'll be honest that LeBron James makes a bigger impact, but I would love to see both of them up close on a team together.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially if Verayaho doesn't get injured, that could be a very, very, very special team. And I think people who think that Kevin Love makes them marginally better instead of way better are absolutely insane. So I love the people who seem to be making the argument that if they get Kevin Love. So a lot of people are making the argument that they're going to win the East anyway, even if they don't get Kevin Love. Which, by the way, good luck with that. LeBron makes the team much better, but I don't think that they are going to win the East. I don't think they're going to beat Toronto or Chicago for
Chicago.
that matter,
Yeah.
without help, right? And second of all, people that think that getting Kevin Love, takes them from 50 wins to 55 wins are absolutely insane. Kevin Love makes this a 60-win team, unless they give up, a piece that they shouldn't give up back.
Or just injuries.
I don't see it. So first of all, I don't see them ever, sending back like Big V in a trade because he's one of LeBron's favorite players. So they're not going to give him back in a trade, which virtually assures that they have a dominant front line, barring injuries. That is easily a 60-win team if they acquire Kevin Love.
Oh, I hope to see it. So, right, we're right about at time, hitting shout out time. So I'll give you the last word on Kevin Love, and then we can hit shout outs.
Oh, I think I've had enough words on Kevin Love, but
I'm not going to lie. I told you before the show, I'm okay with as many Patrick drum solos on Kevin Love out there because, like you, my Twitter feed is just full of stuff where I scratch my head and have to, do double takes and go, really? Like that? How could you think that? So.
Yeah, I think there's just, it's wherever he goes, and I'm sure wherever he goes, the people acquiring him are going to think they gave up too much for him, and they're not going to appreciate it. And I guarantee it'll be like Kevin Garnett all over again, where 2 months into the season, people are going to be like, "Holy cow, Kevin Love is really good," and everyone that all of Minnesota fans are just going to be like, "Fucking think."
Yeah.
It's just, I'm not too upset about it because, like I said, I'm just going to completely bandwagon it up. I'm just going to become a fan of whatever team he joins, and that's going to be my team. I'm probably still going to watch the Timberwolves because I like Rubio a lot, but I won't have essentially I've been looking for an excuse to abandon that franchise for a while, and Kevin Love and Ricky Rubio have been the only things keeping me attached to it anyway. But yeah, I've been on this bandwagon since I think it was 2010 when I said he was the best power forward in the NBA, and people called me crazy. And
Yeah,
4 years later, everyone pretends that they were saying that all along too. But he's truly going to make a huge impact wherever he goes.
Oh, absolutely. All right. So, shout out time. I'll go first. So this week I have just one, which is Nick Haugen. Follower of mine on Twitter, does a lot of favorites and retweets of mine. Random good questions. So yeah, this week, the off season's coming up, so there aren't as many news breaking stories or crazy things, and you may notice I'm not as active on Twitter. But Nick, good follower, and definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't really have any shout outs this week. I was pretty active on Twitter, but all I did was get into arguments, and I don't want to shout out any of those people.
Well, I'll give a pseudo shout out. I've done the passive aggressive shout out. I'll just be honest, where I occasionally call out someone, and when I'm complimenting, I'm really insulting them. I want it to be more overt in this case. So, Tango Tiger, for your amazing understanding or lack thereof of economics and the articles you've spawned as a result. Guess I got to give you a shout out. It's kind of like being a shot creator. You're the Russell Westbrook of this Oklahoma City Thunder team. You're not good at making shots. Your efficiency's not great, but I guess because you were next to Dave Barry, people think you look better. So there you go. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and we will see.